Hello everyone. Uh, Welcome to our first video here, and I'm sorry that you can't see me that well on the bottom corner, and sorry it's kind of fuzzy. Anyway, trying to get this technology a little bit better, so hopefully next time it'll be better. Anyway, we'll cover evaluating sources, how to determine the best research information. This will help you hopefully in your papers, especially when you do research. So aside from not seeing me very well, don't worry about that. The slides is what really matters, and my voice. I'm sure you can hear me, hopefully. So, okay. First of all, I just want to say that uh, one of the best ways to look at how you can find some good sources is through abstracts, and I think you guys know what abstracts are by this time. Those little summaries of articles that you find when you look up professional journals. Like it says here, it shows a credible source and is reviewed by professionals. Uh, every time you see one of those abstracts, you can pretty much be guaranteed that they're credible. So one of the first things you look at reliable sources for is number one, who wrote it. So you want to ask these types of questions. Is the author an expert in the field? And not necessarily an expert. It can be, um, another author or researcher in the field. It's fine. Um, but the expert, I guess you can define that. We're not talking about something that's highly unattainable. We're talking about whether or not the author has credentials. The degrees help, obviously. Their affiliation with different organizations, with maybe different universities, or maybe in one in particular where he or she works. These are the kind of things you ask as far as the person writing this particular piece. Also, you want to check for biographical references. In other words, um, who is this person? You just Google their names. You can pretty much find out about anybody online once you Google their names. Um, Also, you want to find out their perspective because some authors, as you can well imagine, can be biased in their viewpoints, especially if we go into the topic of political science, you can imagine how different authors have different bents or views with their politics. Some are more left and some are more right, or whatever. So, you know, um, and depending on, your topic and how you want to write it and what you feel comfortable with, you need to find out where the author is coming from, right? So find out their political bent if they have any, and obviously it doesn't refer to all types of subject matter, but if you're writing about politics, obviously it refers to that. Okay. Another question I want to ask as far as choosing reliable sources is how recently was it published? Obviously, the English and humanities, it doesn't matter that much time frame because English and the humanities areas, they don't change. They're more historical documents, that kind of thing. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Um, and obviously, if your writing is about any type of science, sociology, psychology, etc., the more recent the research, the better, right? Because these are fields which obviously change from time to time. So it's more recent types of writings are preferred. And obviously, if they're an acceptable or classic type of document, and what I'm talking about is the Shakespeare, Plato, Hemingway, those areas, especially in literature and philosophy, they don't change. We accept these as valid documents, and those authors who do research on these classic authors and write about their works, you know, um, obviously, we accept those because they're classics. Now, obviously, if it's a more recent document, trend that they're writing about. For example, augmented reality, which I think you guys all know that's pretty recent in the type of teaching that we do. Uh, these types of articles are more recent. And if it's about a science, again, aspect, you want it, the more recent, the better, obviously, because it's up to date. So just kind of consider that when you look at reliable sources. Okay, another question you want to ask in choosing sources is it scholarly? So you're checking the credentials, like I mentioned, and references of other articles maybe they've written. Uh, Obviously, you want to look at the bibliography they have, or the works cited, with page, if they have a page. Usually, if an article is written, it's a type of a reference at the bottom of the article. If they have a lot of obviously a lot of articles they're referring to, they're professional and they're scholarly. We look for peer edited types of articles. When you find them in journals, usually they're peer edited by other experts in the field, and sometimes the work itself is written for them, right? Especially in journal magazines, which are written for the people in the field themselves. I would say an abstract is a good indication of a scholarly article. So if you see an article with an abstract, most likely it has uh, that validation of being professionally written. Again, as you guys know, abstracts are summaries of articles, short kind of paragraphs. You find them in your search as you guys look at the databases, at the library. If it's scholarly, it's usually between 5 and 20 pages. And I know that's a broad range, but it varies. Some of the scholarly, writings can be less than 5 pages. I've read some of those, but usually if it's scholarly, they're going to be, a fair amount of pages, and sometimes really over 20. I've had to read articles that are maybe up to 60 pages long. Hopefully, you don't get one of those that you need to research, but uh, you know, uh, if they're scholarly, they're going to be fairly long because they're going to quote other research that was done before as the basis for their own article, right? Uh, Another point of being scholarly is it a popular source? Okay. Now, just because they're written by maybe not a specialist, but by a journalist, who wants to point out there's new research done in the field, it doesn't mean they're not good articles. Okay, it just means that they're kind of going at the reporting at a different way of say, like new discovery. Maybe they have a new medicine for the HIV/AIDS virus, for example, um, and maybe not everybody likes to read the dense, scholarly journals. Well, they'll report that through, these other types of maybe popular sources that we're indicating here, like the New York Times or the Guardian or the Economist. These are more popular magazines or types of, written documents that contain maybe research material that's been quoted or written about. It's not the research itself, though, and that's my point. You know, you may use those at your discretion, but obviously they point to the real research that was done, right? So, and the reason why, like I put here, the reason why they put these professional journal types of research and articles in New York Times, etc., is because non specialist people like you and I, read these more popular periodicals, and we find out about the research. And then if we want more specific information, if we want to know the data, for example, that the research that these articles in these magazines don't contain, then we know where to look. So anyway, that's how we can tell if something is really written by a journalist or specialist. Okay, a few other things here uh, about being scholarly. Is it in a trade publication? Obviously, the trade publications are those that are written for those who are employed in the industry. Some examples in the pictures here about Journal of Emerging Diseases in Virology, which probably these days is getting quite popular, right? The International Journal of Vaccines and Immunization. These obviously these journals and or these trade publications rather are written for those who are interested in the field, and most likely people who are colleagues in the field as well. So take a look at those types of articles. This shows whether or not the document is scholarly. And these are written for the layperson, so that's why I put here they may be appropriate for college research. Okay, written for you and I. Sometimes because they're not in a professional journal, they're a little bit more palatable as far as easier for us to read without so much jargon that we're not used to, and maybe not so scientifically or technically written, that kind of thing. But it's applicable for college research. And maybe this trade publication is written to a specialist audience for marketing purposes. And sometimes they write things to, you're really not the audience, the layperson, you and I, but it's the professional in the field that they're trying to market maybe different products for them, right? So they write um, I don't know if you can call them journals, but these magazines maybe, or publications, trade publications that really cater more to the professional in their field in order to sell them some type of product. Okay, another question to ask about choosing reliable sources is who published it, and obviously the different publishers. You've got the commercial publishers here, an example of Pearson, Scott Forsman. You've got University Press. You've got different organizations that they're, for the most part, they are obviously reliable sources, but there are different types. Organizations and interest groups put out different publications. Yeah, I think they're valid. They're good for the most part, and you can use those in part of your research. Again, just to let you know, those are different though, obviously, than from the research itself. These are just publishers who write, about it. And well, a good example is University Press may even sponsor the actual research itself. So you'll find that in the article. I think the other organizations and interest groups will give summaries of a lot of these professional research articles in journals, because like I was saying, some of these are really, really long, 40, 50, 60 pages. You're not going to put that kind of written document in a magazine or a university press or whatever, because people just don't have the time or necessarily the expertise to read those. So these other publishers will put things out that summarize research that's been done in that particular field or issue in the field. Okay, another question: who published it? And I guess this list of people is really, if you look at it, it's really for those articles you would find mostly on the internet. There's government agencies, and you can tell it's government because it has a .gov at the end. Those websites, nonprofits have .org, schools, edu, businesses.com. You have other organizations and businesses with networks that have .net, and the military has .mil. So depending on what you're looking at as far as who's publishing these sources, obviously you can tell, like on a website, just that ending there, whether it's valid or not. And I would say obviously these endings with these representative institutions are obviously reliable sources. Okay, now we get to really more evaluative efforts on your part as to whether the source is good or not, and that is how well the source is written, right? Well, I divide these. You got magazines that are written professionally, obviously, because they're sold to the public, but you also have personal websites. Okay, of course, I know this website here that's indicated at the bottom, seattle.gov, that's kind of more the government website. But if I had a personal website, let's say from a person who's printing some or putting some discipline that they want to comment about, the personal websites by one person, maybe in a field, may have errors in it, but you can tell that they're more professional if you have um, magazines, for example, that that goes out to a very large public, and they can't afford to have typos and that kind of thing because they're professional and they want to look like they know what they're printing, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't want to buy a magazine that has a whole bunch of errors on it, not just grammatical errors, but maybe factual errors, that kind of thing. So yeah, those are more gone through and edited for facts and fact checking and all that thing. Okay, another thing we want to ask as far as the quality of the document itself, what does the source document actually say? And for this, we have to ask who's the intended audience. Are these for the lay people, maybe in the subject or discipline, like you and I, if we're looking up about viruses or whatever, or is this source document written for the colleagues? In other words, maybe these doctors are studying viruses and things, and they're writing for other doctors. So you obviously can tell that because they'll be throwing in a lot of terminology and a lot of phrases that we won't necessarily understand unless we've studied the field, right? So this is another way of indicating how reliable the source is. We have to look at who the intended audience is. And I would say, you know, um, as much as possible, go to the horse's mouth. If you can quote the original documents that did the research, that's fine. If you can, that's the best, by the way. But if you can also quote, other types of documents that are written for you and I, maybe a little more readable and shorter, that's fine too. You just have to know who they're writing to so you can know how to comment on the actual source itself, right? And we have this too to look at for a reliable source, and that is to ask yourself, what is the purpose of the source? Which really asks you for you to analyze the argument. Again, I guess for this to watch for people who have a certain bias, or they're just covering one aspect of the discipline maybe, and or of the issue, and not a 360 view of what's really happening. You have to really ask yourself that if it's enough for the intention of the author to target you specifically for his or her purposes, and you think that's enough information, then hey, you've got a good source. But if you think it's rather limited because the author wasn't intending for a large audience, maybe just a certain type of individual or a certain, I guess, you know, kind of a certain, how should I say it, a group of individuals, then maybe it's not the right source for you to use. So to just consider who you think the author is writing to. That's an important thing. And then the tone of the source. If the person is really biased or they really have a bone to pick, so to speak, with the with the field they're commenting on, or it really is more you know uh, more of a reasonable argument. Sometimes people write opinionated things on these source documents, and that's fine. Opinion is fine if they can back up, obviously, a lot of their opinion with some good, valid research, then and that's fine. Are there different views in the source document? Because yeah, some writers will put different views. Is it a logical sequence of ideas? Okay, if it's well written. So these kind of things, I think you need to look for. I would say, for the most part, to be perfectly honest, most documents are pretty. If it's out there in the market in the public, they're pretty well written and thought on to be written well. It's when you veer towards more, one person or a small fringe group writings, that kind of thing, then you have to really kind of be aware of where they're coming from. But I would say most things are pretty good. Then again, depending on what your research is, you don't want to just, you can take some, maybe a journalist's opinion or view of certain research, but it's always good to go back to the original research again, back to the professional who has the credentials, and also read their work, and just to make sure you have a balance in your works cited page of, you know, people who really know what they're talking about, and people who found the information are just reporting to you, you know, the results of something. So yeah, I think you need to understand those differences. Okay, and another thing, is the evidence reliable and credible? Uh, as far as the source document, is the evidence cited? Are there citations within the source document? And that always helps. Okay, if you read an article and there's no citation, no reference to any other author or writer, big question mark there. It's probably an opinion piece. So just be aware of that, and those are differences that you can find in different articles. You know, no other citations. Hey, most likely it's just that person's opinion, which is may not be bad, but look at all that stuff. If it's just their opinion, do they quote anybody? They might not have an actual quote, but maybe they have a little bibliography at the end. You know, that helps. But if they have no bibliography, no in-text citations of anyone, be wary of those types of articles. Those are totally opinion. Okay, and I'm not saying opinion's bad, but you just have to realize that person didn't want to put any reference there for some reason, right? Didn't want to cite any other authors. So just be aware of those types of sources. You may just be getting one man's view and not a real balanced opinion because he or she's not not suggesting or sourcing any other sources. Are there links to the internet? Okay, and that's always good because a lot of articles that you can read, there's the URL right there. You just click on it and it goes right to the article on the internet that they're sourcing from, right? So that's always good. So if an article has a lot of those, that's a good thing. That means they're taking their opinions from other sources and not just their own. So I think you need to look for that as far as a reliable source. Okay, hopefully I've covered everything, and sorry if it's a little bit too long, but wanted to make sure I covered all these points. I know this is not interactive, you're not seeing me live, so if you guys have any questions about this presentation that you just viewed, please let me know, and I will answer them. And for this presentation, you may have a question. In fact, you will for this one. So just look online later and you'll see a discussion question that you need to answer for this particular presentation. Thanks and see you again.